She did not block him because she stopped loving him. She blocked him because she was tired of being right about the things he never said out loud. That is the part people get wrong about silence. It is not the absence of feeling. It is feeling with the volume removed. Myra Ose blocked Cale Farrow's Comm code on a Tuesday at 600 station time, 4 minutes before her shift on the Halcyon Reach began. She did it standing in a supply corridor with a ration bar in one hand, because she did not trust herself to do it anywhere she might have to look at something that reminded her of him. The block was not dramatic. It was a single line of text on her wrist display. KF, Comm restricted, 72 HRS. She had set the timer herself, which meant some part of her had already decided this would end, and that the only open question was what shape she would be in when it did. He had told her he was staying planetside for the survey extension. 6 more weeks. He had told her the night before she shipped out, in the tone people use for weather, and she had not said anything, because there was nothing to say to a man who could tell you he was choosing to be somewhere you weren't and expect you to nod. She did not need him to choose her. She needed him to say once that the choosing cost him something. He never did. He said 6 more weeks the way a man reads a shipping manifest, accurate, unbothered, closed for discussion. He did not raise his voice. He did not lower it either. He simply stated the fact of his staying like it was whether she would have to dress for, and let her decide, alone in the doorway, whether the sentence underneath his sentence was one she could live with. She could have asked him outright. She had considered it, standing there with her duffel strap already biting into her shoulder. She decided against it, because a question you have to ask is not the same as an answer freely given, and she had spent enough of her life accepting the first as a substitute for the second. So she left, and she blocked him, and she told herself the silence was a boundary and not a test. Cale found out about the block from the automated bounce message, which informed him in flat administrative language that his Comm code had been restricted by the recipient and that further attempts would be logged. He read it twice. Then he sat down on the bunk in his temporary quarters because his legs had developed an opinion about the news before his brain had. He had spent 6 weeks telling himself that staying was the responsible choice. The survey needed him. The team needed him. Myra was strong enough to leave without a scene, and strength, he had decided, meant she did not need him to make one either. He understood, sitting on that bunk, that he had mistaken her composure for permission. He did not try to unblock himself. He recorded a voice message instead, on the 3rd day at 21:40 station time, knowing it would sit unopened in her queue for as long as she wanted it to. He recorded it once without a script because a rehearsed apology is a performance, and she had never once asked him to perform for her. The message was 4 minutes and 12 seconds long. He did not know that yet. Neither did she. Before he recorded it, he sat in the dark for a while with the light off, because it was easier to say true things to a room that couldn't see his face doing it. He thought about the survey extension, 6 weeks of soil density readings and atmospheric drift models that had felt, at the time, like the responsible thing, the adult thing, the thing a man who took his work seriously would choose. He had not once in 6 weeks asked himself what it would cost her to watch him choose it without a fight. He thought about the last morning, specifically, Myra folding a spare jacket into her duffel with the same economy of motion she used for everything, not looking at him, and him standing in the doorway with a mug of recycled coffee going cold in his hand, saying 6 more weeks. That's all, like 6 weeks was a unit of time and not a decision about what mattered more. She had said okay, just that. He had let okay be enough, because okay was easier to live with than whatever she actually meant by it. He understood now that her silence in that doorway had not been agreement. It had been her waiting to see if he would notice. Myra did not delete the message. She told herself this was practical, deleting it would require opening it first, and opening it was the one thing she was not going to do. But the real reason was smaller and harder to admit. She wanted it to exist, unopened, the way a letter under a door exists whether or not you pick it up. Its presence was already doing something. It meant he had said something, finally, even if she never heard it. He left a message he knew I wouldn't open, she thought, running diagnostics on the Halcyon Reach's port thruster array with more attention than the readouts required. That's either the least strategic thing he's ever done or the only honest one. She kept working. The thought stayed. The next 3 days did not feel like a countdown to Myra. They felt like an inventory, day 1. She caught herself checking the timer on the block, 68, 14. 2, not to see how much longer it would last, but to see how much longer she had before she'd have to decide anything. She realized, watching the numbers fall, that she had never actually wanted him blocked forever. She had wanted him blocked long enough to find out whether he would try. Day 2. Her crewmate Priya asked her, without much delicacy, why she looked like she was doing arithmetic in her sleep. Myra told her about the message. Priya asked the only question that mattered. Do you think he's the kind of man who says the easy thing into a recorder he knows won't be heard for 3 days? Myra did not answer, because she already knew Cale was not that kind of man, and admitting it meant admitting the message might be worth something. Day 3. She found herself rereading an old flight log entry from 8 months earlier, the week they'd met, where she'd written a private note about him that she'd never shown anyone. Quiet in a way that makes you want to know what he's protecting. She had forgotten she'd written it. She had not forgotten what it meant. She also remembered, that same day, the way Cale had once rerouted an entire supply run, 3 hours out of his own schedule, no announcement, no credit claimed, because she'd mentioned once in passing that the station commissary was out of the tea her mother used to make. He had not told her he'd done it. She had found out by accident from the quartermaster weeks later. That was the shape of him, generous in the places no one was watching and silent in the one place she'd needed him to be loud. It was that contradiction, turning over in her head on day 3, that made the case against him feel less like a verdict and more like an unfinished argument. Each memory did the same thing. It took a piece of the case she'd built against him and set it down somewhere she could no longer reach it without also reaching for him. The block would lift at 600 on the 4th day. That was not the deadline that mattered. At 900 that same morning, the Halcyon Reach was scheduled to leave the Kessler Relay Station for an 11-week outer-system run. A run with no comm bandwidth for anything but priority traffic. If Myra did not open the message before departure, it would sit in her queue for 11 weeks, and whatever it said would arrive, if it arrived at all, as an artifact of a version of them that might not exist anymore by the time she read it. She had known about the departure window for a week. She had not let herself connect it to the block until day 3, lying awake in her bunk, doing the math on 2 countdowns that had never been designed to run together and now would not stop. She did not tell herself she was afraid. She told herself she was being efficient. Efficient people did not lie awake at 2:30 with a voice message they had not opened glowing quietly on a screen 4 centimeters from their face. At 300, Myra opened it. She did not decide to. That was the part she would think about later, that there was no moment of resolve, no speech she gave herself, just a hand that moved before the rest of her had signed off on it. Cale's voice came through unpolished, a little rough at the edges the way it got when he hadn't slept. He did not apologize first. He told her instead about the moment he'd realized he'd made the wrong call, not the moment he decided to stay planetside, but 3 days later, watching a departure manifest scroll past with her name on it, when he understood that he had let the easiest version of loving her stand in for the hardest one. I kept telling myself you didn't need the words, he said. That's not the same as you not needing them. I just didn't want to find out what it would cost me to say them. He told her about the tea, too, that he'd never mentioned it because he hadn't wanted her to think he was keeping score, collecting proof of himself to produce later as evidence. I thought love was supposed to be quiet like that, he said. I didn't understand until you left that quiet only works if the other person already knows what's underneath it. You didn't know. That's on me, not on you. He did not ask her to forgive 6 weeks in 4 minutes. He said he understood if the block stayed up past the 72 hours, if it stayed up longer than that, if it never came down at all. He said the only thing he could control now was whether he kept choosing the easy version of this or the true one, and he was done with the easy one. He said he was requesting reassignment to the Outer System Survey Rotation, the one that would put him on a station along the Halcyon Reach's route in 9 weeks, not because he expected her to wait, but because he wanted once to be the one who showed up somewhere for her instead of asking her to stay somewhere for him. The message ended without a flourish. He did not ask her to call back. He said simply that he would be there in 9 weeks whether or not she ever unblocked him, and that this was the first time in his life he had done something because it was true and not because it was safe. Myra sat with the silence after the message longer than she'd sat with the message itself. Then she did not call him. She did something smaller and in its own way harder. She let the timer run out on its own at 600 without extending it, without deleting the message, without pretending she hadn't listened. She spent the last 3 hours before the block lifted doing the thing she was best at, which was not forgiving him but auditing him, running his 4 minutes and 12 seconds against 8 months of evidence, the tea, The doorway, the 6 weeks. The reassignment request he didn't yet know would be approved. She was looking, she realized, for the one detail that would let her stay angry. She did not find it. What she found instead was a man who had finally done the arithmetic she'd been doing alone since the doorway, and arrived, late but honest, at the same number she had. At 600, when the block lifted on its own, she did not call him. She left him a message of her own, 19 seconds, unscripted, that said only that she'd heard him, and that 9 weeks was a number she intended to hold him to. The Halcyon Reach left the relay station at 900, on schedule. Myra spent the first hour of the outer system run doing something she had not done in 3 days. Her actual job without doing arithmetic underneath it. She ran the thruster diagnostics. She filed the report. She did not check the Comm queue because there was nothing left in it that needed checking, only something that needed 9 weeks, and she had never once been afraid of a countdown she'd chosen herself. Somewhere back on Kessler Station, Cale filed his reassignment request before his coffee had finished brewing. He did not know yet whether it would be approved. He filed it anyway, because for the first time in 6 weeks he understood the difference between staying because it was easy and choosing because it was true, and he was done confusing the two. Her 19-second message arrived on his wrist display at 6:03. He played it 4 times before he let himself move again. It did not contain the word forgive. It did not need to. She had said 9 weeks, and to Cale that landed as something closer to a coordinate than a sentiment. A fixed point in the dark he could navigate toward, the way she navigated everything, without excess and without doubt. He thought about the survey director's face when he requested the transfer with 6 weeks still unfinished on his contract, and decided he did not much care what it looked like. He had spent 6 weeks being the responsible choice. He was finished being responsible in a way that cost him the only thing he actually wanted. He did not think about the battle he might have to fight to get the transfer through. He thought about a docking bay 9 weeks out, and a woman who had never once needed him to perform his love for her, only to say it, unblocked, out loud, before it was too late to matter. 9 weeks, he thought, checking the request status for the second time in 4 minutes. I can work with 9 weeks. 9 weeks out on the Halcyon Reach, Myra would keep a private count she did not tell Priya about, marked not on her wrist display, but in the back pages of the same flight log where she'd once written quiet in a way that makes you want to know what he's protecting. Each entry would be short, a number, sometimes nothing more. It was, she would think later, the least dramatic love story either of them had ever been part of. No ultimatum, no rescue, no speech given under fire. Just a man who finally said the thing, and a woman who finally let herself hear it. And 9 weeks of ordinary distance closing the only way distance ever really closes. On purpose, one filed request, and one unblocked Comm code at a time.